I'm Simon Rosenberg from NDN. Thank you all for being here. And this is our first event out of Speak Up. Thank you. Yeah. It's why you have a staff, right? To tell you things like that. This is our first event of what will be 7 public events that we're doing here at the convention. And so please, if you like what you see and you want to participate with us at the other things that we're doing, please check on the way out. We've got a list of the other events that we are doing. But I'm excited to say that we are leading off this convention activity with a discussion of one of the, I think, the most consequential debates that we've had in American politics in recent years, the debate over how to fix our broken immigration system. This has been a wild fight in Congress and around the country. We've got a remarkable panel, and I'll let Andres in just a minute introduce everybody. But I'm very proud of the role that we've played. And for those of you who are in this room who've been part of the NDN team and supporters, you know, there's really 2 things I'd like just to reflect upon. First is that starting in 2002 with the urging of Bob Menendez and then Congressman Bob Menendez and then Attorney General Ken Salazar, NDN began an effort to really help educate the center-left in American politics about the rising opportunity of this Hispanic community, the rising population, how it was changing American politics, the rising Hispanic population, how it was changing American politics. And I'm proud to say that in that time, we've done literally hundreds of briefings and dozens of press interviews, and we've done produced study after study and blog post after blog post, really trying to help educate the family about how the country was changing. And what I'm excited about is that in 2004, at the Democratic Convention, and if you looked at the way the Democratic Party played the Hispanic community, it was, I will just say, and John Kerry is a friend of mine, I don't think the Kerry campaign really understood the demographic and regional opportunity that this the rising Hispanic vote really meant to the Democrats. The Kerry campaign didn't put a lot of effort into the Southwest and into Florida and didn't really spend a lot of money on Spanish language television. And I think if you look back at George Bush's 2 victories in 2000 and 2004, and Andres is going to be talking more about this in a moment, is there's no way to understand the Bush success without understanding what he did with the Latino community, that his doubling his market share with his vote was instrumental in him winning states Democrats had won before: Florida, Arizona, Nevada, Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado. And these 5 heavily Hispanic states were critical to those very small victories that George Bush had in each of the last 2 elections. What we're seeing today, though, is that the Democratic Party has woken up to this emerging and critical opportunity. You saw the Democrats now have brought their convention to Denver. You've seen the Democrats have now added Nevada, southwestern state, to their early Magic 4. It used to be the 2 of Iowa and New Hampshire. Now it's those Magic 4 states early on. You've seen, the Democrats have elected leaders in Congress, Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, who are from the West and really understand the Latino community. You've also seen the Democrats, you've seen in the Democratic primaries, Bill Richardson, a bilingual candidate of Mexican descent, go very, very far in the Democratic primary process. So I would say that the great change from 2004 was the Republican Party in 2004 was more aware of how the rising Latino population was changing American politics. But this time, you see a very different story. This time, you see a Republican Party that is paying the price for the demonization of immigrants in these last few years, and a Democratic Party that has woken up to this remarkable opportunity. I'd like to think we had a little bit to do with that here at NDN, and I'm very excited to be able to be leading off our first event at the convention with a great discussion about something of great consequence for the country. So thank you all very much for being here. And I do want to recognize, before I close, that we have representatives of 2 embassies here today, Mexico and Panama. Welcome, and we're very glad to have you here. And I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Andres Ramirez, who, if you don't know, Andres is the Vice President of NDN and is the director of all of our Hispanic programs. Andres.
Thank you, Simon. I owe a lot of gratitude to Simon. Simon has shown a lot of leadership on these issues for an organization like NDN, which many people at the beginning did not consider what many people call a Hispanic organization, to have the backbone, the strength, and the vision to get engaged in an issue as important as immigration and what it means to our country and what it means to progressives as a whole. I started briefly in DN, I should say recently, not briefly, in February of this year. Prior to that, I worked for the Nevada Democratic Party, and prior to that, various other political and campaign jobs that I did. My wife was Senator Harry Reid's immigration advisor for about 10 years, and actually serving in that capacity for so many years caused so much grief in her that she couldn't take it anymore, and actually decided she wanted to just leave politics altogether, about witnessing many of the atrocities that happen to immigrants in this country. So this is an issue that for me personally means a lot. It's something that my family has gone through. My mother herself happened to be born a U.S. citizen because my grandmother, who was a Mexican national, was a factory worker in the northern state of Mexico working across the border in Brownsville. And while she was pregnant, her employer would not give her any time off. So she went through labor and gave birth on the American side while she was at work. Therefore, my mom was a citizen. And ironically, going through that unfortunate situation, I've been blessed with American citizenship as well. But knowing that, growing up many parts of Mexico during my childhood, many parts of the United States, it was something that we saw firsthand each and every day. So when I had the opportunity to join NDN and engage in this issue, it was something that for me personally was very, very powerful and very important for me to engage in it. And I will tell you that the solution, at least in my eyes, is not that difficult. We've seen it. We have great policy experts. You're going to hear from many of them here today. And what we need to work on now is the politics of the issue. And we need to make sure that many of these right-wing radicals like Rush Limbaugh and Lou Dobbs aren't tainting this debate so that we can have a rational discussion about how we promote better immigration. It's one of the things, and you'll hear from Frank Sharry in a bit, I like to steal his line from him, is that none of us want illegal immigrants in this country. Everybody here wants to be legal if they have a chance. They're just not given that opportunity. And so we have to find a way to fix this. We have to find a way to work on it. There was recently a poll that was released this weekend. It was taken for the Western region. It was done by the Denver Post, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and the Salt Lake Tribune, where they interviewed all the Western regional states, including states like Wyoming, including states like Arizona and Utah and so forth. And again, what we've seen, which has been consistent for the past several years, is that Americans want a solution to immigration that will allow a pathway to legal status for the undocumented immigrants that are already here. This is what Americans want, and this poll just continues to confirm that. So we know that we have the American public on our side. We know that Americans are practical about the situation and this issue, and we just now begin to need to find a way to implement this on a practical level. And so I am here with NDN working on various of these issues. NDN is a partner organization with America's Voice on a project called Immigration 08, which is a project that I'm sure the panelists will get more into. But this is something that we're going to invest a lot of our time, a lot of our resources into, because we are convinced that this is one of the most vexing national problems affecting us in this generation. So I'm not going to take up too much of your time today because I want to let some of the actual experts that are coming here. I know this issue is very important and passionate to me on a personal level. I know that there are several people here that you're going to hear from that know this issue on a much deeper, much better basis. So I'm going to take some time to introduce them. Just to give you a format for how this goes, we're going to allow the panelists to speak. After they speak, at the end of the presentation, we're going to allow some time for question and answers. So if any of you guys have questions, please make sure you jot them down during the meantime so you don't forget them when we get to the end of the presentation. And I'm going to allow our panelists to actually spend time going through this because I know that's what you guys are here to hear. So our first speaker that we have today is a very, very dear friend of NDN's, Congresswoman from California's 16th District, Zoe Lofgren. Zoe is the chair of the Subcommittee on Immigration. Very important person to have in this discussion. Her role actually is going to determine what the actual bills in the House are going to look like. And Zoe, just briefly, among many of her accomplishments that she does, I mean, she is one of our biggest allies on this issue. Zoe has been fighting passionately, whether it's to help with tech, the tech industry, to help the undocumented immigrants on the agricultural side, to help all the various aspects of this. Zoe is a champion of fighting to get immigrants' rights in this country. And so I'm very honored to have her here. I'm very honored that she chose to speak with us, and I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy what she has to say about this issue. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Zoe. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And thanks. Before I say another word, I want to introduce someone who is a good friend of mine, a colleague, and an absolute spectacular member of Congress, and that's my friend Raul Grijalva from Arizona, who's here with us today. Raul, I'm honored that you would come. Before I got on the plane in San Jose this morning, I took a look at the NDN website to see, what am I supposed to talk about? And I was astonished to see that I was supposed to explain first what the challenge will be for the new president and how to meet the challenge. So if I knew how to do that, I suppose it would already be done. I took over as chair of the Immigration Subcommittee in February of last year, and we have held dozens of hearings on immigration. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One, for the half-decade before I took over as chair, very little had happened in the subcommittee except an occasional hearing to equate immigrants with terrorists, but really nothing else. And so we felt it important to have a set of hearings that developed a factual basis for legislation that might need to occur or to inform changes in the administration that are absolutely necessary, because if you take a look at the system, you find huge problems. And I think it's useful to think about the system in its various components. First, there's both the benefits and enforcement side, and then there's the administration and the actual law side. And if you take a look, for example, at the administration of the benefits side, you find a large set of problems. One of them is that we actually don't have a computer system that works. It's hard to believe, but they are still creating paper files. They have a series of legacy systems that do not interconnect, and this causes problems for the benefits that people seek in a whole variety of ways. Just a quick example, we had a hearing recently on the problems of immigration related to members of the United States Armed Services. And one of our witnesses is an E2 in the Navy. She is a legal permanent resident of the United States, and because she's in the Navy in active duty, she could apply to naturalize. She did so. She didn't need to file a paper to remove the condition that is necessary because her LPR status was based on her marriage to an American. That never got connected. So her order for deportation was sent to an address in LA while she was deployed in the Gulf. And so, one of the questions she had for her commander was what would happen if she deployed with her troops instead of going to LA. And he said, well, if you go to Kuwait with us, we'll have to leave you there because you will have self-deported. Now, what kind of system leaves the sailor in Kuwait because of this kind of mess? There are a whole variety of communications between the State Department, between DHS, between Justice. I'll just say that there is a failure of administration that's not new. I'll give the Bush administration credit. This has been a mess for decades, but it's time to fix it. And that is the first thing that the new president will face. Then there's also, take a look at the legal side. The 1996 Act, so-called Reform Act, that I voted against, and how unsatisfactory are the words, "I told you so," really did not work as promised. I recall the first time the implications of a 3- and 10-year bar, so that if an American citizen marries somebody from another country who's been out of status for some numbers of months, the American citizen has to go live in another country. And that was told to us that this would stop illegal immigration, but in fact, it has fostered illegal immigration because either the American has to go live in some country where they may not speak the language, their children may not get the education they would in America, or the intending immigrant has to, and an American have to violate their marriage vows and live apart, or the intending immigrant has to go underground. And it's estimated that a substantial number of the 12 million who are living in the shadows actually, under normal circumstances, absent the mistaken measures taken in '96, would have been eligible for legal permanent residence visa under ordinary immigration law principles. So between that and the delay for after acquired spouses who are married to legal permanent residents, the need to reform our temporary worker programs, the H-2B program, which is necessary for the American economy, but the Southern Poverty Law Center has shown us is in drastic need of reform to protect against abuse of immigrants in that program from the unrealistic numbers in the system. And we have 1 million farm workers, roughly 1 million farm workers in the United States. It's estimated that over 70% of them are here without documents. So how many unskilled legal permanent residence visas do we have in our system every year? 5,000. And that's for everything, not just ag. So we really created this system, and it's up to us, working with our new president, to put some sense into the whole framework of the law so that it works for America. I just want to mention briefly on the administration of justice, the Department of Justice scandal. That has not been something that's been before the Immigration Subcommittee, but it very much does involve immigration. I serve on the Administrative Law Subcommittee as well, and we started into the U.S. Attorney scandal. I actually honestly believed we'd find a couple of yahoos who had misbehaved. I didn't expect what we actually found, which was a web of corruption that the Inspector General in his report indicated went directly to the White House. And Karl Rove has a special section in the Inspector General's report. That corruption did result in individuals being illegally appointed as immigration judges, and we know from the analysis reported in the New York Times today is skewing the results of asylum cases and probably many others. That's something I think that needs to be dealt with and I hope can be. Now I want to talk a little bit about the enforcement side, because whatever system we have, obviously enforcement is an issue. And again, that goes to two things. I mean, what are the laws, but also what is the quality of administration? And I've just got to say, this is the worst administration I've ever seen, starting at the top of ICE. You know, when I served with Jim Sensenbrenner, and don't always agree with Jim, but one thing Jim was very insistent on when he chaired the Judiciary Committee was that there be competent people appointed to jobs. And he actually had a provision that I didn't agree with at the time. In retrospect, perhaps I was incorrect, that put basic qualifications for these immigration positions, that you had to know something about immigration law, you had to have managed a large organization, that you had to be qualified. What a concept. Instead, we had Julie Myers, appointed at age 36. She'd held a variety of jobs. She'd never managed more than 2 or 3 people. I think an important credential was that she worked with Ken Starr on impeachment. Her uncle is an Air Force general, and of course her husband is the chief of staff of Chertoff, the head. So obviously, of all the people in America, she would be the most qualified to run ICE. And certainly, that has been run in a way that has elicited condemnation from many circles. With roughly 30,000 people in ICE custody at any given time, the lack of qualifications has become acute. I'm sure you've all read the reports of detainees dying in custody, all the way from Mr. Castaneda, who was denied basic medical care in Southern California for an extended period of time until he was released and then died, to Amina Moody, who was a victim of torture in Somalia. You know, the first thing we do when someone applies for asylum in this country is to put them in jail, who was in custody for 5 months and given psychotropic drugs, almost died until her volunteer pro bono lawyer, who was the head of the IP department in some hotshot law firm, in New York who couldn't believe the system that she had come into, managed to get a habeas petition to involuntary druggings, nurses overruling the physicians on site. It's a bad situation, but you know what bothers me is not just the situation, but that the department is resistant to the bill, the Lofgren-Menendez bill, to quantify having some kind of basic medical care standards. They will not accept that, but they also really don't seem to care. Chertoff was quoted, I think, just today, and his comment on Mr. Ng, who was an engineer, computer engineer, married to an American citizen, 2 U.S. kids, house in Queens. He and his wife went for their appointment for his legal permanent residence card, and whereupon he was arrested and put in custody and was denied medical care over a period of years and of months, pardon me, and then died. And Chertoff's comment was, well, you know, I hate to see any detainee die in prison, but you're going to get a certain number of deaths. I mean, that's compassion for you. We've seen a decline in due process that I find very troubling. Many of you, I'm sure, have read about the Postville situation where nearly 400 immigrants were arrested and then prosecuted for identity theft. And the interesting thing is, according to the search warrant filed by the department, they hadn't actually stolen anybody's identity. They'd fabricated a number, but the number didn't belong to anybody else. And there was, you know, clearly those individuals might well have been deportable unless they had an asylum claim that they were clearly not permitted to make. But it was one defendant, one lawyer for 17 defendants. The judge scripted the pleas. It's not the kind of individualized prosecution that the Constitution actually seems to provide for any person accused of a crime. I also think that we've had a skewing of the nation's priorities through prosecution of minor immigration offenses. We've had tens of thousands of immigration prosecutions in the southwest quadrant. Still only about 5%. I mean, at this rate, it would take us over 2,000 years, actually, to deport everyone who's allegedly here illegally. But at the same time, the reports that we've had from DOJ is that we've had a 38% decline in organized crime prosecutions in the southwest quadrant. So clearly what's happening here is that we're racking up numbers, really prosecuting nannies and busboys, while the drug cartel that is a serious threat to Mexico and the United States is off the hook. They're no longer the subject of our attention. We've spent a huge amount of money incarcerating people, and the department has been unwilling to use ankle bracelets for anybody who would ordinarily, in the real criminal law, if these were criminals and not merely detainees, be eligible for them. And so we've ended up with an expensive, stupid system that has not solved America's problems. You know, we had our very first subcommittee hearing at Ellis Island, and we had the head of the Border Patrol as one of our witnesses. It was such a magnificent experience for me. And this is what David Aguilar said in his testimony at our first hearing. We cannot protect against the entry of terrorists and the instruments of terror without also reducing the clutter that is caused by illegal migration across our borders. To most effectively secure our border, we must reform our immigration system to relieve this pressure. We need comprehensive immigration reform. Now, that's what the career guy in Border Patrol says, but what we've got from the administration is more fences seal the border. And unfortunately, John McCain, who used to be in a more rational spot, has now apparently gone over the cliff. Here's what he said, and I quote, "The fundamental point here is we have to secure the borders first. That's what we know, that the American people, they want the borders secured. As president, I will secure the borders. I will have the border states' governors certify that those borders are secure. That's before comprehensive immigration reform." Well, you cannot seal the North American continent. You can do a good job of, and I applaud doing a good job of sealing the border. But unless we create a system that actually provides for the orderly movement of people, that allows families to be reunited, that allows the economic needs of the American economy to be met in an orderly fashion, we're not going to have a system that's workable. So we need to create a system that actually is workable and then expect people to use that system. We don't have that now. I think we have learned some lessons from the last 2 years. First, we need to do this in public. We need to talk to the public, and we need to do effective public outreach. America is a nation of immigrants. Everything that we like best and say is good about America, we're entrepreneurial, we're risk takers, we're optimistic, we're brave. Those are the characteristics that come from our immigrant roots. And so we need to be constantly refreshed by new Americans with those talents. And I'm confident that in the first term, as Barack says, the first term, we will get comprehensive immigration reform. Thank you.
Well, there you go, folks. Zoe says she's confident we'll get comprehensive immigration reform in the first term. I believe her. You know, the next speaker we're going to have is a young man who's new to me, probably not as new to many of you, a man by the name of Marco Lopez, who is the incoming director of the Department of Commerce for the state of Arizona. Prior to that, he served as a senior advisor to Governor Napolitano and also served advising on relations between Arizona and Mexico. Now, one of the things that appealed to me is that this gentleman, at the age of 22, was elected mayor of the city of Nogales in Arizona, making him at that time the youngest mayor in the country, and was reelected in 2002. And I always applaud people who are willing to put, especially young people who are willing to put their name on the line to run for office, to fight what they believe in. And also, as a consequence, this young man happens to be there at the border in the state of Arizona, where the hotbed of immigration is going on, in the city of Nogales, dealing with this issue every day. And now as the incoming Director of Commerce, he's going to talk to us about some of the issues that Arizona is dealing with in facing this immigration issue. I'd like to acknowledge just real quick before we move to him that we just have joining us Ambassador Sarukan from the Embassy of Mexico. Thank you so much. It is no secret to anyone that we will need to have a great partnership with the government of Mexico in order to find a true solution to comprehensive immigration reform. So we are really appreciative that the ambassador would take time out of his schedule to join us. But having said that, I want to turn it over to Marco.
Thank you, Andres.
I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Andres, and I want to thank all of you. I want to also acknowledge Congressman Grijalva, because Congressman Grijalva is my congressman. I live in Nogales, but he also is a congressman who is responsible for the majority of the 377-mile border between Arizona and Mexico and the Mexican state of Sonora. But Arizona has really had its share of challenges in the last couple, I would say 5 years, simply because 50% of the undocumented apprehensions that have been a result of Border Patrol have come within that 377-mile stretch. So that has meant that whether it's been the tribal governments, the county governments, or the local governments, there has been a growing, or had been then, it started 5 years ago, a growing concern that this dilemma was out of hand and that the federal government was totally ignoring its responsibility to provide a safe environment along the border for its residents. The governor was very quick to understand that if we were going to be able to tackle this problem and tackle the issue of the insecurity throughout the border region, that it had to be done not unilaterally by us in Arizona, but that it had to include our partners to the south. And I think it was a great moment of opportunity when we realized that we had a fantastic partner in Governor Bors of the state of Sonora in Mexico. And it's been really that dynamic that has allowed Arizona to get a grasp of what is, or what has developed along Arizona, along the Arizona-Mexico border. I want to give you some examples of what we have done and what Arizona has had to do creatively to try to tackle the growing concern by Arizona residents that the federal government isn't doing anything to try to solve the growing trend of migration from south to north. Understanding, obviously, that in Arizona alone, we need workers, we need legal migrants, so that our economy can continue to sustain the growth that Arizona has had, whether, depending on which numbers you look at, if we are the first or the second fastest growing state, it's a reality that we need the workforce to sustain that growth. So what we have partnered in large part through the Arizona-Mexico Commission and the Comisión Sonora-Arizona on the Sonora side. And by the way, its president is here with me today. Victor Flores was appointed by the governor 4 years ago to head that organization as its president. But a couple of initiatives that the governor has put into effect, along with our partners in Sonora, Mexico, to try to stabilize or to try to really focus in on the topic of illegal migration. Because we know that it's a violent, it involves violent criminal organizations that in the past were using those networks to transport drugs and to transport illegal contraband, and that now are using those same networks to bring people. And they are willing to bring individuals across, lying to them about the ease that it takes to cross the border. They go either deep into southern Mexico or in central Mexico and tell them that they can get across the border in Arizona and in an hour have access to an interstate that will take them anywhere that they wish to go. The reality is that Arizona has some of the harshest desert climate, and about 250 people yearly pass away because they buy into that. So understanding that, both states have done the following. First, we partnered with the federal ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm, and our friends in Sonora, because we clearly understand, as I've said, that those networks are being used to transport individuals from south to north, and on the way back, they're taking back money or guns, and that it is these same guns that later turn up in crimes in Mexico, and we now have the ability to trace them to see where they were purchased in Arizona, because we know that the majority of them are purchased in the United States, and that unfortunately for those in our region, they're purchased in the state of Arizona. So having the ability to trace those firearms so that we can then have a fuller investigation as to where that criminal element is moving throughout the state of Arizona. And last week at the Border Governors Conference, hoping to spread that net of investigative capacity throughout the border region, so that, again, these criminal elements understand and realize that that it is no longer easy to move from Arizona to, say, New Mexico, because we're going to have similar processes in place throughout the border region. The next one is, we're again, just launched a couple in June 30th. And this one involves fugitives, individuals who commit crimes in Arizona, and our ability to share that database with law enforcement in Sonora, so that those that believed in the past that they could commit a crime in Arizona and go to Sonora and live, well, that's no longer the case. We now have the ability, and it works both ways, that if you are stopped for whatever reason, that immediately law enforcement could be alerted, and then the federal government could intercede so that the proper mechanisms could be managed to make sure that that individual pays for his crime in either country or in either state. So that we erase that border, so that the border is not a shield for criminality anymore. The other is stolen vehicles, something as simple as stolen vehicles. We know that stolen vehicles in Arizona are driven down to Mexico, and then they're used to smuggle individuals for as small fee of $500 to $5,000 or $10,000, depending on where it is that you're going in the country. So we can track those vehicles and we can get them at the source so that they can't use those as a tool for their trade. And I think perhaps the biggest obstacle or biggest challenge was 3 years ago when Governor Richardson and Governor Napolitano called upon the federal government to use the assistance of the National Guard to help strengthen the capacity of Border Patrol along the border. I think that we've seen that in the past 2.5 years, the operation has worked, and we have been able to transition more Border Patrol agents to the line. When I was mayor in Nogales, I remember having a conversation with then Tucson Sector Aguilar, who's now the head of National Border Patrol. I said to Chief, it doesn't make sense. Here you are out in the desert chasing individuals who want to come across and work while they're mixed in with individuals who want to do us harm, who want to bring drugs across. Why don't we have a system in place so that we can weed those individuals out, get the people who want to work through the port of entry here in Nogales, and instead, you know, that those who are left in the fringes are those that obviously aren't able to, for whatever reason, to go through a regulatory process. And it really is that simple. It's just unfortunately that, as the Congresswoman stated, our laws and the way that they're written don't allow us to think or to act as simple as I've just indicated. So we've, in state government, have had to adjust all of this while we understand that Mexico is our largest trading partner. In Arizona, it's about a $15 billion relationship, and we cannot build a wall, and we cannot deport individuals who are in this country illegal, and we cannot look the other way and hope that the problem goes away. Because as the governor has said, every day that we ignore the problem, it's silent amnesty. And as individuals who care about reform, who care about a total overhaul of the immigration system, we know that by doing nothing, indeed, it is silent amnesty, and we're hoping that the problem will go away, knowing that full well that it will not, that people will continue to come because we need them to come. And that's the reality that we have in Arizona. And I'll tell you that for most northern states in Mexico, it's a reality that they have too, because most of the crossings of individuals who come to Arizona are not from Sonora. They're not from Nuevo León or from Coahuila, Chihuahua, or Baja. They are from deeper in Mexico, so they have the same problems along the border on the Mexican side. So just wanted to kind of throw these ideas out so that you could appreciate a little bit about how being and living and experiencing life along the border really is, and what states have had to morph into because of the lack of federal responsibility, federal taking responsibility for the work that they should be doing. So I'll leave you with that.
Thank you very much, Marco. So our next speaker is a great friend of NDN, a great friend of the immigration community, someone who is currently serving as executive director of a new project called America's Voice. And I'm going to let him tell you about them. But prior to that, he was also the executive director of the National Immigration Forum. And I would say for a few decades now, he's been working on immigration reform. He is someone who knows this issue inside and out and has been a strong advocate. And just one of the things I do want to say to preface before he speaks is that many of times when we talk about this immigration issue, it comes down between a Hispanic issue and an American issue. And this isn't, we're not talking about solving immigration to help Hispanics. We're talking about solving the immigration issue to help all immigrants, and that includes Asian immigrants and European immigrants and immigrants all around the world. And so I just want to make sure that I at least am clear of that, because sometimes I know that gets overlooked. And I know it's something that Frank as well has championed consistently and made sure that when we talk about comprehensive immigration reform, we're talking about all immigrants and fighting for all immigrants' rights. So having said that, I'm introduced a longtime champion of comprehensive immigration reform, a great friend of NDN, great friend to immigrants, Mr. Frank Sharry.
Thank you. Well, I'm honored to be on this panel. especially with Congresswoman Lofgren. She is one of the best minds in the country on immigration, not one of just the best minds in Congress. She's actually a law professor who knows this complex area of law better than most people in the country, and we're so fortunate to have someone of her caliber in the middle of such a contentious and complicated debate. You know, there was a lot of talk about why the Senate went first in the last session and how it crashed and burned. With Congresswoman Lofgren as the head of the House Judiciary Committee, many of us are hoping that we'll go in the House first next session, because we think that she'll be able to provide the kind of leadership that'll give us a much better chance to get across the finish line in, if not the first session, the first term of the next president. I also want to give a shout out to Janet Murguia, who just showed up from NCLR. You'll be hearing from her in a minute, but you know, they're under a withering attack, a vicious attack from right-wing groups who are trying to discredit and tarnish Janet and NCLR, which usually they get attacked from the left for being too pragmatic. They're now being attacked from the right for being too ethnocentric, I guess is what Lou Dobbs has said, calls it. But Janet has been incredibly strong, and if you haven't seen the toe-to-toe Janet Murguia, Lou Dobbs YouTube session, you have to see it. Because he did all of his bullying, blustering that he could, and she said repeatedly, free speech does not permit hate speech. It was very powerful. And I gotta also give some love to Simon and Andres and NDN. Simon and I don't always agree, and he lets me know it when he doesn't, but he has been a visionary on this issue. He saw the policy and politics before most of us. Some of us saw the policies, some of us saw the politics. He saw the confluence and has really gotten NDN out in front on this issue. And this event is one in a long series of efforts to make sure that progressives get this issue, which is not always the case. Progressives don't always get this issue. It's complicated. So what I'm going to do is try to tell you a little bit, from my point of view, why progressives have a huge stake in this policy debate, in this political debate, and what I think is now becoming a moral challenge. So from a policy point of view, this issue is there's two competing narratives, basically. You've got one narrative, particularly from the right, that says we have good laws and bad people who are violating these good laws. And what we have to do is enforce the hell out of the good laws so that the bad people stop coming and go home. That is what they have now called, they put a pretty name on top of this brutal policy. They call it attrition through enforcement. They saw the polls that showed that most Americans realize that mass deportation is impractical and they're opposed to it. So what they've come up with is mass self-deportation. The idea is to make life so miserable that people will leave. So this is being practiced in Maricopa County around Phoenix by Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who is stopping people who are driving while brown and asking for papers. It's being practiced in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, where they're trying to drive people out, Prince William County in Virginia, and now the Bush administration, who once said they were for comprehensive reform, is now roaming immigrant neighborhoods with fugitive teams, having workplace raids in which poster child unscrupulous employers get a free pass, while Guatemalans that barely speak Spanish are being locked up in federal prison for months. So they're really trying to create an atmosphere, what the New York Times editorialized and called it the misery strategy. We've come up with a new term with it. We call it nonviolent ethnic cleansing. What's happening is a moral outrage, and it's a policy debacle. So, oh, it's so good to have a new job. So what's the competing narrative? This is the one that most Democrats, not all, but most Democrats are finally coming around to. It's the comprehensive immigration reform analysis. It basically says you have workers and families coming from the rural south of the border to service sector jobs and their loved ones on the other side of the border, and there's no legal mechanism for them to do it. There's no line to get into. You know, I do a lot of those radio shows where people call up and they say, why don't they just go to the consulate and apply? Or why don't they go to the post office and apply? And I know 12 million people who would love a post office line to get into. And people who would much rather come on an airplane than across the desert, risking their life, where 450 to 500 people die every year, so that they can be subject to abuse and exploitation once here. Not even close. So what this analysis says is, immigration can be regulated effectively rather than repressed ineffectively, and that that's the best way to gain control. It's a remarkable thing. It's not well understood. I know Republicans spend a lot of time trying to define Democrats as soft on illegal immigration, but when you look at it from a smart policy point of view, what the Democrats are proposing in comprehensive reform would result in control. You'd have legal workers and family members coming. You'd have people here able to get in citizenship line, get legal status. You'd have a crackdown on employers not only for illegal hiring, but for abuse and exploitation. And what you would have is you would replace an illegal system with a legal system. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. But repression, driving people further underground, makes the bad guys bigger winners. Saw an article in the Mexican press recently. The polleros are thrilled with the new crackdown. The price of smuggling has gone up. The number of deaths is likely to go up. The ease by which unscrupulous employers can take advantage of folks has gotten easier. That's attrition through enforcement means making a bad problem worse. So those are the two competing narratives. Now the interesting thing is that most Americans agree with the comprehensive immigration reform notion of a path to citizenship for people who are here as part of a reform that will try to gain control of the system. The problem is that, as we all know, is that the opponents are very visible and very vocal. Some of them even have TV shows, right? And so they have been the tail wagging the dog and have, in effect, almost taken over, almost completed the takeover of the Republican Party and scared enough Democrats where it's been hard to move reform. But I predict that that's going to change. I predict that's going to change. First of all, I think what you're seeing in the presidential race is indicative. John McCain, who was a champion of comprehensive reform, who understands that the only way to secure the border is to pass comprehensive immigration reform, had to pander to the right wing in order to remain viable in the primaries. He had to change his position in order to get those rabid anti-immigrant cultural warriors in his party, and he did. And now that he won the nomination, he's saying, we're going to secure the border first and then pass comprehensive immigration reform. For someone who gets it, that is complete nonsense. You can't secure the border until you pass comprehensive reform. By saying you have to secure the border before you can do it, he's given a veto to the right wing of his party for any movement on comprehensive immigration reform. And more Democrats are starting to get it. Not as many as I predict will. More and more Democrats are starting to get it. And here's the politics of this issue. So the politics of this issue is that pundits and many politicians have thought that illegal immigration is a culturally charged wedge issue that works for Republicans and hurts Democrats, even though there's very scant evidence. Let me tell you what I think is the emerging trend on the politics of immigration in an electoral context, that it only works in some Republican primaries. That's where it's been proven to work. There's very few close general races where it's been the deciding factor. In fact, you have two Arizona races in 2006 with Gabriel Giffords and Harry Mitchell up against J.D. Hayworth, this cultural warrior who wrote a book, Whatever It Takes, and used to go into town hall meetings before his 2006 election. He won his race 2 years earlier by 21 points, and he said, there's a war that we have to wage against illegal immigration. Any questions? And people would raise hands, well, what about the war in Iraq? That's what's on our mind. So the politics are shifting. You see that Republicans are using the issue because it's in their DNA. You have an enraged Latino and immigrant population that sees it as a defining issue and is mobilizing in record numbers and could well redraw the political map, as Simon and NDN so ably point out. And the thing that I think is underreported and underappreciated is that swing voters are starting to pay attention. Are they frustrated about this issue? You bet. But increasingly, there's a body of evidence that shows they're angry at the government for not solving it and at employers who are causing it, not at the immigrants who are coming here to better their life, feed their family, and risking their life to do so. A remarkable development. So I think what you're going to see, and I hope it's faster rather than slower, it sure will help Chairwoman Lofgren if more Democrats get on offense, is that if Democrats lean into the issue and define themselves, they will win against the demagoguery of Republicans because they're for a practical solution that captures the imagination of more swing voters and speaks to the defining issue for many Latino immigrant voters. So I think that's the new politics of this issue that's going to start to emerge. And it's part of this larger narrative. Republicans using what, again, Simon calls the Southern strategy, right? You know, it was crime, welfare, affirmative action, gay marriage, a litany of issues. Illegal immigration fits right into that tradition. And Democrats have to stand up to the bullies and define themselves as being for a solution that respects, as Barack Obama says, that we're a nation of immigrants and a nation of laws. Let me finish by just saying that I think that the stakes of this are really high. I think this has become one of the defining issues of our generation. I was terribly naive last time around, I have to admit. I was a policy guy thinking I thought we were having a policy debate. And what I realized is that this was an emerging battleground in the war between progressives and a culturally populist right wing. And it's a new front in the culture war. It's should brown immigrants be allowed to stay or should they be expelled? Let's be honest. That's what, for a lot of the hardcore, this is about. When they say it's about legal status, yeah, right. It's about the rule of law. How come they're celebrating when there's fewer students in Prince William County who speak Spanish? It's not about legal status for many of those folks. So this is going to be a defining issue for our generation. Are we going to be a country that stands up to bullies, that stands up for our best traditions and our finest ideals, or are we going to allow these these extremists to continue to hijack the debate? And that's the stake I think that progressives have in this debate. This is no longer just about what to do to fix a broken immigration system. This is about whether we as Americans are going to include people or exclude people. And as someone who's worked for 25 years with immigrants, the outrage that we feel as workers, Julian Ross from the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition, Roberto Lovato who writes on this, when you know what people come with in terms of their aspirations, they are American in all but paperwork, and to turn on the news every night and hear them called criminals, you know how insulting that is? Or when these political operatives tell Republicans, say you're for the citizens but not the illegals, which is translated as, after I deport your brother, I want you to open a small business. Because people live in mixed status families. So this debate, I believe, is going to define us. It's not about defending illegal immigration. It's about moving towards ending it. I think Democrats will win the middle. They'll win Latinos and other immigrants, and they will marginalize a Republican Party that's making a mistake of historic proportions. I just hope it happens soon, because the suffering right now in immigrant communities is ripe. I'll just end with this. When I worked at a place called Centro Presente in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the legalization program was put into place in 1986, man, the first person who applied was an SEIU member. Betty was a janitor, and she was like the courageous one who was going to go apply. And she, everyone was scared. Is this a setup? Is it going to work? And she came walking back in with her laminated mica, man, and she slapped it down on the desk, and we're all standing around. And she goes, "Ahora no tengo que comer la mierda de nadie." Right? Which I'll translate. She was really, really happy. Now, it means she's not going to take guff from anyone anymore. And we're on the verge of a historic breakthrough in which 12 million people and the millions of people who live in their households can suddenly say, I'm not going to take crap from anyone. I'm going to be able to stand up for myself and be not just an American in all but paperwork, but an American citizen who's enfranchised, who's taken seriously, and who participates in this country to make it better. So I think we have a tremendous opportunity. I look forward to working with all of you to get it done.
When you work on immigration that long, you can be as fired up as Frank can be. So our last speaker, certainly not our least important speaker, is a person who I consider a very dear friend. I actually first set foot in this downtown about 8 years ago. I got a call from then the deputy, and before I start this, I had to modify my intro because Frank stole most of it. So the then deputy campaign manager of the Gore Lieberman campaign, who says, Andres, we need you in Colorado. Can you go to Colorado? I, of course, had just gotten married at that point and was living in Nevada and had to explain to my new bride that I was going to be leaving to Colorado. but Janet says they needed me in Colorado, and we were going to win Colorado. So I came here because I trusted her. I still trust her. We didn't win Colorado, but it's okay because we made it extremely competitive. We made the Republicans spend money here, and it was a great campaign and a great experience. But Janet has been a great friend and a mentor to me. She used to serve in the White House, special assistant to President Clinton in legislative affairs. Before joining the Gore-Lieberman campaign as deputy campaign manager, she's also served as the chancellor of the Kansas University System.
Executive Vice Chancellor.
Executive Vice, excuse me, sorry. Executive Vice Chancellor of the Kansas University System. And currently she serves as the president of the National Council of La Raza, the largest Hispanic civil rights organization in the country. And this is someone who understands what Hispanics are going through, what immigrants are going through, what the civil rights issue has been. And as Frank Sharry stated, this is someone who's not only talking about it in friendly crowds, she is not afraid to go into the lion's den and take on Lou Dobbs directly and take on all these other radical right-wing idiots who don't understand this issue and fight for our cause and fight for our people and fight for our rights. And because of her strength, her tenacity, her courage, I will always admire her. She is always going to be a hero of mine, and I appreciate every single time she indulges me and indulges my cause. So thank you so much, Janet, for being here.
Thank you. My goodness. Wow. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be among such distinguished panelists. I, too, want to commend NDN and Simon and Andres for pulling this together. It's really a wonderful opportunity to catch everybody up on this very important issue. And, of course, Andres has done yeoman's work since that time in Colorado and has gone on to serve in so many ways on behalf of great causes, including many of those who have no voice. But I want to commend Chairwoman Zoe Lofgren. She's been terrific in providing leadership in the Congress on this issue and holding hearings and allowing us to make a case before the public. And so I commend you on that, and I know that you also are working very closely with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and others to find a solution. We commend you for being here and for your continued leadership. And the two panelists here, of course, Mr. Lopez, we've not met before, but I've heard, you know, at Ground Zero in Arizona, I know you've been very involved with a number of our affiliates, the community-based organizations that are working very hard on the ground to help combat so much of the negative sentiment we've seen on this issue. And Frank Sharry here is a true champion, a friend, someone who has been a mentor to me in many respects on this very issue, and who we can all take great comfort in the fact that he is at the helm of an important new organization at an important time. So we appreciate the voice that you are giving to the voiceless. So it's a real pleasure for me to be here today. I want to just add maybe perhaps one other dimension here. You've heard a lot about this issue, probably not much for me to add, except for to say that as a Latina and someone who represents a Hispanic organization, it's interesting how people are trying to sort of view Latinos in this whole debate and in this whole mix at this very important time. And I would just sort of echo a couple of things. One is that as Latinos and Hispanics, you know, we care about a lot of issues. There are many issues of great importance to us, and in like many respects, you know, we care about the economy, and we care about the fact that we want jobs and access to health care, and this foreclosure crisis we wanted addressed, and so many of the urgent issues that everyone else cares about. That's all true. But there's also no question that there is an issue that cuts across our community in a unique way that is something that I believe is mobilizing the Latino community like no issue has before, and that is the issue of immigration. We see it affecting us not just because it affects the country and we think it's an important issue that needs to be solved, because many of us, many who've been citizens here, many who have been part of generations of family here, still have family members that are affected. We still have community members and co-workers, and we understand what it's like in having our previous generations affected by this issue to see injustice and inhumanity when it affects everyone. And we're seeing that issue manifested as it comes to the forefront today. You know, for us, we thought this was an issue about public policy as well, and we thought we were in an honest policy discussion. But after the bill failed last year in the Senate, there's no question that we saw a very negative wave. In fact, my senior vice president, Cecilia Munoz, coined it as a wave of hate directed not just towards immigrants, but towards all Latinos. Because the fact of the matter is that everyone can tell you that they're not talking about Hispanics. They love Latinos. You know, they love legal immigrants. They're only talking about illegal immigrants. They're only talking about those people. And let's face it, as Latinos, we know that people can't make that distinction. We know that this is about all of us. And we're feeling it now in a way that we've never felt it before. Whether it's our skin color, whether it's that vowel at the end of our name, whether it's an accent in the way that we talk, we are feeling under siege, and it's palpable. At first, we thought it was just a feeling, but guess what? With more time, we were able to actually document that what we were feeling was actually true, because statistics can be an important data point to sort of demonstrate that. And we got help. We had independent organizations like the ADL who said, you know what? There's real hate speech emerging in all of this debate that's directed toward not just immigrants but Latinos, and that is dehumanizing and demonizing a segment of our society. And guess what? The ADL has a history of documenting hate speech in this country as an independent body. And they started noting that when people were talking about undocumented immigrants or this issue, they're referring to our community in animal-like terms, as swarms, as massive hordes, and animal-like references in terms of the way that people were talking about this segment. At the ADL, they went through a series of steps of saying, you know, this is qualified as hate speech, because when you demonize and dehumanize a segment of population, you really are putting at risk a segment of society. And so we also looked to the Southern Poverty Law Center that has a history of documenting hate groups and the rise of hate groups. And guess what? The Southern Poverty Law Center was actually able to attribute a rise in hate groups against not just immigrants, but Latinos. So much so that we saw that hate crimes against Latinos are now up 35% over the past 4 years. Coincidentally, the same time we've seen the rise in the intensity of rhetoric around this issue. And hate groups targeting Latinos are up 48% since the year 2000. 2/3 of Latinos say that the failure of the immigration bill has made life more difficult for Latinos overall, and roughly half say that it has affected them personally. So while many say that they're not talking about Hispanics, they're talking about undocumented immigrants, we do believe that people can't make the distinctions and that they really are venting and directing this hate and this animosity towards many of us who have been here. Ask Jesus Garcia, a legal resident of Texas who spent more than 30 hours in custody for appearing to be undocumented. Ask the chief financial officer of Micro Solutions Enterprises, who was picked up and illegally detained, along with 100 other legal Los Angeles residents when his company was raided. He asked why only those who looked Hispanic were being questioned. And so far, there's been no answer. Ask 17-year-old Justine Mancha, a U.S. citizen, who emerged from her shower to find ICE agents with guns in her living room shouting for her papers and looking for what they called illegals. Or ask baby Tomasa of New Bedford, Massachusetts, who was separated from her father by an immigration raid. As many of you might not know, for every 2 people deported, 1 U.S. citizen child is left behind. So far, more than 13,000 American children have been separated from their parents as a result of our misguided immigration priorities. There's no question that the humanitarian crisis that's being perpetrated under the name of enforcement needs to be recognized for the national tragedy that it is. Our nation's immigration laws do need to be enforced, but what is happening today with these raids is really an assault not just on civil rights, but on common decency and on basic humanity. And it's outrageous that only workers are being targeted in most of these immigration raids, while the owners and managers of the plants go unpunished. You know what? We are better than this. America is better than this. And if we are going to live to the ideals that we know this country stands and represents, we have to step up at this point in time and define what it means to be an American. And we had that chance in this election process. One of the things that we did as a result of all this data and documentation is created a website that has all this laid out, and it's called www.wecanstopthehate.org. I hope that you'll go to that website, wecanstopthehate.org, and understand how we have documented how hate speech really is creating this division unfairly, and it's being parroted every night by the cable news networks. We're seeing a lot of these folks not only play loose and fast with the facts, but they're showing these negative images night after night after night. And they're parading many of these folks who represent hate groups as documented by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they're parading them as immigration experts. We have to have a higher standard for the way that information is shared, and we definitely need more transparency. This website, wecanstopthehate.org, makes an effort to document what we can do and what we have seen, but also it makes recommendations about what we can do in directing attention to many of the cable news network heads about asking for more transparency and definitely more accountability when it comes to this. But the other thing that I've asked our Latino community to do, because we can have an opportunity now where we can use the leverage and the weight of the numbers that many see in the Latino community, because we know that this is about all of us. It's not just about a segment of our society that can't speak for itself. And many of us who believe that we know that we can put America on the right path with regard to this issue can step up, and these elections will never be more important. The Latino community sees it that way. That's why we and many of my sister organizations have worked hard to help naturalize many who have been here who've never taken that step to become citizens. And we saw more than 1 million people become citizens in this past year because, as Frank said, there's a feeling anymore that we are going to step up and we're going to understand that through our vote we can control our destiny. And as Latinos, this is a defining moment for our community in this country, and we can speak up for those who have no voice. And as you look at the demographics, I don't have to tell you, you saw them on the clips today, but in those swing state votes, Latino community can make the difference. And we intend to not only elect a president with courage, but we intend to elect senators with courage, congressmen with courage and women with courage, and local and state elected officials with courage, because this is our time to step up. And I believe that we're going to have a historic turnout, and we're going to turn back the wave of hate, and we're going to call for a wave of hope that will hopefully then lay the track for comprehensive immigration reform. Thank you very, very much.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much for being here. I know that Simon has been given a lot of credit, and we're going to thank Simon again for his visionary on this issue. I also just wanted to make sure I take a moment to thank one other person in the room, and that is my deputy, Soraya Tapia, who's come on board with NDN and has done a great job of helping us put these events together. And so, having said that, like I said, I know that I was going to open it up for questions. So what we're going to do is if you have a question, please raise your hand. Soraya Tapia is going to handle selecting which one of you actually gets to pick a question and then passing you the microphone. But again, just want to thank all of our panelists, and thank you guys for being here. And just also, before I leave, if you want any more information about what NDN is going to do continuously about this immigration issue, log on to our website, ndn.org, and also feel free to visit our blog that we write a lot about this issue.
And if you could just please say your name and introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Jose Diaz Briceño, the Washington correspondent for Reforma newspaper from Mexico. This is the question for the Congresswoman. In political terms, what is the feasibility of passing, comprehensive immigration reform in the first year, in the first term? And what's the dialogue occurring among the Democratic caucus? Is the position of Mr. Rahm Emanuel still popular of, this issue cannot be addressed until a second term of a Democratic president?
I believe that Senator Obama has indicated publicly that it would be his intent for comprehensive immigration reform to be enacted in his first term. And I certainly would welcome that. Obviously, elections matter. And the American people are going to make a decision on this, along with many other things, the Iraq War, the national debt, and many other, the economy, come this November. But I think it's very clear that nobody, absent really the far right, is satisfied with the current situation. It's a dysfunctional system. It doesn't work for the intending immigrants. It doesn't work for the American economy. And it doesn't work, and it needs to be fixed. The one thing most regular Americans did not want us to do was to do nothing, which is what we have ended up doing. I think that clearly we'll never have success with an enforcement-only approach. It needs to be comprehensive. We need to create a system that, as I think Frank said, a lot of people believe, I was stunned when I saw the polling on this, that people who've come here over illegally did so out of choice, that they declined the opportunity to apply for a visa to come. They decided to sneak in instead. Well, as someone who knows immigration law, that is not accurate. It's inaccurate. There is no ability to apply for a visa and go take a job that I don't see a line of Americans waiting to take, picking carrots in Bakersfield and a bunch of other things. So I think the American public would like us to create a responsible, enforceable system, and I think that it is possible to do that depending on the outcome of the election.
Can I just add that I think Rahm has backed off of his position where he said it was going to happen not till further in. And I think a lot of it has to do with the outcome of the election of the Congress, too, and the margin of victory or what the larger
Senate.
In the Senate and in the House. And I think if those developments occur in a way where there's a strengthened majority, I'm not saying that the Democrats aren't going to have a hard time with this issue. They are, as was acknowledged here. But I do think that changes the dynamic in some fashion.
Let me just add also that in terms of where the Democratic Party is, I don't know what's in the platform, but our speaker has made it very clear, and she speaks for the House Democrats. We're not a monolithic bloc. Not every single House Democrat sees it the same way, but that we are for comprehensive immigration reform, and that is where the vast majority of the Democrats in the House are, and we need more Democrats in the Senate.
Hi, my name's Roberto Loato. I'm with New American Media and The Nation magazine. And I want to thank Simon and Andres and Soraya for organizing this, one of the only immigration events at this whole convention, which I think says a lot about the Democratic Party and its priority on immigration. Nonetheless, thank you all as well for your time. This is for the Congresswoman and for the panel at large. A lot of us have been traveling the country, documenting a lot of stories and cases. Cases like the denial of habeas corpus, arbitrary and indefinite detention, dogs being used against people out in my part of the country in New York and New Jersey, psychotropic drugs being given to people who are captured by ICE. We have now an average of 11 raids a day. If this was, say, another country, we'd have a war. Right, 11 raids a day on people's homes, in the streets. And 70, I had a fact checker check this for me, that the deaths that we know that have happened in detention, the more than 70, I think it's up to 80 maybe, add up to more than the amount of people that died in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo combined. And so given that situation, given the just devastation and terror being lived in the heart of Latino America and in immigrant America, my question is that a lot of you signed off on the McCain-Kennedy bill, and 700 of the 800 pages of the McCain-Kennedy bill were chock full of things that would jail more children, things that would induce more raids, that would create a generalized climate of attacks on immigrants. And so my question is, doesn't the current situation merit putting detention, raids, at the center of immigration, comprehensive immigration reform, instead of, or perhaps next to, legalization? Thank you.
First, let me say that I think some of the things that are going on in the enforcement of immigration laws, many of the things that are going on are really enormously disturbing and not in keeping with, in my view, the requirements of our Constitution, let alone common decency. In fact, the subcommittee has held hearings on many of these things, and in some cases the information became publicized because of the hearings that we had in our immigration subcommittee. Having said that, the Bush administration is completely unwilling to change its behavior. We've had both public discussions and private. They're on a track to do this. I really think when you come to our challenge in the next under the next president, President Obama, it's not going to be easy. I mean, if it would be easy, it would be done. But you can't just focus in on detention without focusing in on allowing people to gain their lawful status. I mean, and there are people who, if we have a system that is workable, will still violate it and will still be deported. And that's, if we have a system that works and is defensible, that's something we're all going to have to buy into. Because if we set up a series of rules that will work for people, it's only fair to expect people to work within that system. We don't have that system today. We cannot get the Department of Homeland Security to report to us, even though they have promised to do so, those people who've died in their custody. And we find out from the New York Times, honestly. And then sometimes there are people like Mr. Castañeda was released to die, so he wouldn't show up in their custody in any case. So there, in addition to the abuse of detainees, the malicious behavior in some cases towards detainees, the answer is not to have so many people who cannot have a legal status in this country. I mean, there are other just common sense things. I was in local government for longer than I've been in the Congress, and one of my jobs was to chair the jail oversight committee for people who had actually committed crimes or were accused of crimes, unlike the immigrants. And one of the principles of managing the resource of a jail is you don't put everybody in jail. If somebody is going to show back up for their hearing, then you don't keep them in custody because it costs $90, $100 a day to keep somebody in custody. And so if you have somebody like Mr. Eng, for example, who is the most recent case reported on by the New York Times and who was miserably abused and denied treatment and then died. I mean, he'd lived in the United States for over 20 years. He was a computer engineer. He was married to an American citizen. They had 2 United States children, and they owned a house in Queens. That guy wasn't going anywhere. So maybe you might want to put an ankle bracelet on him. But, I mean, the whole system is wrong. And as I think Frank said and Janet said, it's meant to be wrong. They're trying to show that they're tough guys. It has nothing to do with law enforcement, really. It has to do with playing to their base. And I think there's a lot of suffering that's occurring as a consequence.
I'd like to also respond, because Roberto's a fierce critic of some of us who have, tried to approach this with enforcement being part of the deal. And so I partly agree and I partly disagree. I partly agree in this respect, since we're talking in the family here, that the attempt to get a bipartisan top-down approach failed. First of all, there were a lot of concessions that were made up front, but it failed because those concessions failed to bring the Republican votes that it was supposed to bring. So we made concessions on policy in search of votes so that it could get to the House where Congresswoman Lofgren in a better controlled environment could move it to the left and we might have something workable. But we made a lot of concessions and it failed, leaving the current situation. And I think in the self-criticism that many of us have engaged in afterwards, that is one of the mistakes that we've identified that we're not going to repeat. Now, that's where I partly agree with you. And the stuff about raids and detention, the outrage that you've been writing about for a long time, I think more of us are starting to give voice to that outrage. The fact that the raid in Postville, Iowa has become such a national story, I think shows that there's finally this realization that this administration has ICE cowboys running amok and that it's out of control. They use detention for everybody. They can't control it well, and people are dying in detention as a result. So it's outrageous what's happening. Now, But here's where I partially disagree. I think that many progressive advocates don't talk about reform in the context of rule of law. I just want to challenge us. I think we have to talk about, I think we have to win the rule of law argument rather than cede it to right-wingers who want to expel millions of people. I think we can win it because our approach to immigration reform will restore the rule of law at the border and at the workplace if it's done right. And so I just challenge us to not shy from this right-wing attack when they say, oh, you don't care about the rule of law, and you say, yeah, well, you don't care about humanity. We care about humanity and the rule of law. And that's, I think, the formula that's going to both work on the ground and is true to our values as a country. So look forward to more of us speaking up that way.
Hello. My name is Peter Fontanes. I'm from New York. I'm a member of the board of LULAC. And we've been very active in the whole immigration issue, particularly in New York on the safety issue. I'm a builder, contractor. I'm head of a contractors association. And we just forced the city to spend something like $6 million to Mayor Bloomberg. Was very receptive and came forth after a number of untimely deaths on construction sites. And I think the human side and the emotional side is important. And I think the liberals and the progressives certainly have led the fight. But I think sometimes what happens is that we tend to shortchange ourselves. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I'm used to being called a snobbish liberal for being from New York. But I think we have to reach out across certain avenues, and one of them happens to be in our struggle in New York. We came across, we were very surprised, we were contacted by the Home Builders Association, and they've come out with a very strong statement, and they've asked us, we've attempted to be part of this, but somehow or another, we're not getting the attention. And I would strongly suggest that we bring in industries that, I tell you, I'm a builder. If you were to take away the workers that we have, this industry would collapse in a minute, and the implications for the economy would be extraordinary. So I think we really need not to just deal on the emotional side, but also on the practical, the economic side, the what can happen, and how these people, how the whole object of this is to bring a vibrancy to an economy. And I think we tend to forget to do this every once in a while. So I just want to point out that I think we need to get more involved with other organizations that we may not believe, may not be receptive to what we're doing, but they are.
Can I comment, because as the Senate was working last year, we were trying to put together a coalition on the House side that would come up with a bill that we thought would be better than what they were moving towards in the Senate, but that included outreach to unlikely allies. And to me, if you work together on an issue, even if you disagree on 70% of the rest, and you work together on the issue you can work on. So that was the attitude we took into it. And I won't mention anybody's name here, but when I walked in, I'm from Silicon Valley. I recognize a lot of people who are from technology companies who have a presence in Washington. They are for comprehensive reform. They lobbied for the whole thing, not just their little piece of it. The problem was that in the Senate, by the time their phone system melted down with the hate callers, the Senate didn't care what the Chamber of Commerce thought or anybody else. So we need to get out with our story, our message about how we want a responsible system. We want the rule of law. We want to have a system that is enforceable and that serves American interests, because that's really where we all are.
My name is Joel Judd. I'm a state legislator here in Colorado. In fact, this is my district, and of course, you're all welcome. The game is in Washington in terms of comprehensive immigration reform. Is there a role for the state legislatures?
Yeah, I would say yes. The game is in Washington, but until Washington acts, we've seen a lot of harm done at the state level when we've had, some states act to, or I can tell you this, it works both ways. States can act positively or negatively. Let me throw one issue out there we feel very strongly about, the DREAM Act. I think that when you have young children who are brought to this country through no fault of their own, who go through the education system in this country and beat the odds and graduate when a lot of our kids aren't graduating, and decide that they want to go on to college, why not let them have in-state tuition and have them be able to give back to the state economically and in innovative ways that we don't even know about? Yet we have legislators who are not acting in that regard, or who are trying to act in negative and punitive ways. Until there is a comprehensive reform, there's other ways at the state level that states are acting. In Arizona, we're seeing different ways that they're trying to repeal any sort of benefits for undocumented. And we already know that's the law. Well, a lot of that's just used to play up to certain bases, to play up to the media. You all can play a role in not letting that happen, or allowing more positive things to happen at the state level, until we can get folks to do the right thing in Congress and with the new administration.
I would just add that all the local and state elected officials can be part of a team for change. Yeah. You know, really, nobody is closer to the electorate than the local government people, next state, the next, you know, maybe the Congress, where you see people, and to take, you know, we're all moved by stories, and it puts a face and an understanding to an issue. Recently, the valedictorian of Fresno High School was, he was going to get, he'd gotten a scholarship, go to the University of California. Instead, they were going to deport him. You know, there should have been tremendous outrage across all the local governments, but I didn't get a letter from any of them. So I think, and I don't want to be negative on them, we need to do a good job in advance of organizing together to put a human face on this subject, because the American public is not an ugly, horrible group of people. They're smart people. They're patriotic people. They want a great country, and they also know we're a nation of immigrants. And if we lose that, we lose our past, we're not going to have a future. So be a partner with us on it.
I think Janet's right. I think part of our challenge in Arizona has been trying to stop the damage, not the good that the legislature can do, but the damage that they can do. And the governor has been good at vetoing bill after bill that tries to demonize the immigrant community and find additional ways to put pressure on them that is unconstructive. It only plays to the base that Janet spoke about. And that's part of the problem that we see in Arizona. Unfortunately for Arizona, what then they do is they put it on the ballot, and it goes out in that form. So it's a real challenge for us. Part of what we have done, part of what the governor has done, is find ways that we can try to talk about and address the issues associated with immigration, knowing full well that obviously we can't alone as a state solve the root problem, that only Washington can do it.
My name is Jeff Fallis, and I'm with the College Democrats, and I'm from Georgia. My question is, what do you think about repealing all the immigration laws since about 1924 and making it as easy to immigrate into this country as it was 100 years ago, where you just passed through Ellis Island and went through a cursory check and you were legal?
That's not going to work. And, you know, it's interesting, I mentioned that we had our very first hearing, subcommittee hearing, at Ellis Island. And one of the things that I had not actually been aware of, but it made my family's personal story make more sense, was that not everybody even went through Ellis Island. If you were a steerage or second class, you went to Ellis, but if you were first class, you went directly to Manhattan, just no muss, no fuss, off the boat. That is not something that for the American public would welcome at this point. We also have, you know, the idea that terrorists are coming across our southern borders based on all the information I've seen, both classified and unclassified, not realistic. But we do have a national security issue on entry to the U.S. overall, and there has to be, that has to be attended to. So I do think that much of what has happened in the law, especially in the last 12 years, has been really stupid stuff. And I hope that we can amend them and put some kind of a sense into the laws, but I don't think we'll go back to the time when my grandfather just walked off the boat when he was 16.
I don't know if you're being facetious or not, but let me just tell you this. So I will say that, you know, it's not, what's interesting is if you go back 100 years and look at the arguments and the rhetoric that people were making about the waves of immigrants that were coming in back then, it's going to tear our country apart. We'll never, you know, this is not what our forefathers envisioned. These folks are, and they referred to these folks in derogatory terms, not unlike what we're seeing today. But none of that panned out to be true. We saw that, you know, folks came into this country and were able to assimilate. And I would argue that what we're seeing now is that immigrants are assimilating at a faster rate than immigrants did at the turn of the century.
Absolutely,
it took two generations for folks to really master and dominate the English language. Now we're seeing that after the first generation, the folks are losing their native languages. So many of those you know, intense, negative rhetorical arguments that were made back then against that wave of immigrants was similar to what we're hearing now, and none of it was true. I would argue the same could be said about this particular climate that we're facing right now around the immigration issue.
My name is Anna Cruz. I'm from Florida, so this is a topic that we are seeing a lot of, although we don't have enough surrogates that are talking about this issue. So as someone who talks to the press quite often about a slew of democratic ideals and issues, I think that it is imperative that you help us help you relative to messaging, because today on the front page of the St. Petersburg Times, you see 3 Mexican men who have done a slew of rapings, and that's what's being covered. And so what is now being talked about mostly is being driven by fear. And we need help to talk about the real issues about immigration and comprehensive immigration reform. So whatever messaging you can get to our state legislators, to folks like myself, or direct us better on how to get that out there would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, so America's Voice is designed it's a new organization, but focusing a lot on communications and messaging. So we'd be happy to work with you. Our website is launched today, and but we'd be happy to work with you. And any candidates, I know Simon and NDN is interested in doing some candidate trainings as well. I mean, look, this is a tough issue to talk about. Those of us who talk about it know from bitter experience, but with practice, it's actually we have much better arguments than our opponents. And they appeal to a much broader swath of Americans. And so people like you really need to just stay out there, gain confidence. We'll get experience talking about it. I'm sure you're very experienced talking about a range of issues. And quite frankly, I think that's going to be the key to Democrats. The state legislator who was speaking, we're interested in putting together a whole project in which state legislators are organized into something like a caucus that presses Washington for change. That's something that's like a missing element in the debate. Playing defense at the state level is one thing. Offense on the national level is something else we need. And finally, I got to put in a plug for immigration08.com. Simon's featured on it, Pete Brodnitz, Linda Lake, others. We're really tracking how immigration is going to play in close elections at the congressional level and the gubernatorial level. And it's remarkable how this conventional wisdom has taken hold, and immigration is a scary issue that Democrats need to run away from, when in fact the evidence so far up until this election cycle has been just really the opposite. And so we're going to do that, and we're going to track it, and we're going to comment on it, and we're going to poll it, because quite frankly, we have to make sure that Democrats understand that leaning into this issue will better equip you when your opponents are demagoguing than allowing them to define you with their demagoguery.
Particularly in challenger races like we have in Florida. We
Exactly.
have so many challenger races, and our guys just aren't schooled up enough.
Happy to, between the family, we're happy to make sure that people get help.
Good afternoon, muy buenas tardes. My name is Cindy Benavides from Virginia. I am an immigrant, I am a Latina, I am an American, I am the American dream. And I am the American dream because my parents came to this country when I was 1. My mom cleans houses, my dad cleans cars. And they instilled in me the value of education. And I was able to graduate from the University valedictorian in 3 years. So talk about, having all those qualities. I have 2 questions for you. One to follow up with the question in terms of media. One of the things that we're seeing in Virginia is that even before we get to answer the question, the way that the media is formulating the questions are very biased, so that the way that you would be answering them would be already in the negative. So I would want one of you to please address that. The second one is there a collective effort in terms, at the national level, in terms of know your rights? I know that we're definitely seeing ICE rates pick up in Virginia. I know that's true nationwide, but I would definitely want to know more information about that.
Yeah. You know, on the media question, you know, we've done our part through this wecanstopthehate.org to at least demonstrate how the cable news networks are parroting and using these negative phrases that are qualified as hate speech and documented as hate speech. And all we can do is try to educate the public and try to hold the media news heads accountable for this and better educate them. So we did that. We created this website. We're asking folks to go there. I've met with the network heads. You know, there is a fine line between hate speech and free speech, and we feel that that can be crossed. But for many in the media, you know, they feel like they have to push the envelope and they have a lot of latitude to do so. All we can do is, I think, in addition to putting that kind of pressure on them, is start to use more economic pressure. And what I have done on behalf of our organization and working with other groups is what we're doing is looking more and more at who are the sponsors of these media outlets. Who are the advertisers that are advertising on these media outlets? And the same way that we're recognizing that we can leverage our political power, we need to leverage our economic strength. And we need to hold those advertisers and sponsors accountable for any of the time that they're given to outlets that we think are offensive to our organization and that go beyond the pale in terms of that. So we are moving forward to create more of that pressure economically based on the outcomes of this website that we have. So that's one way I think that we can all do so, and I think you can do that at the local level. I know that there were examples where local radio stations were going over the line, and many citizen groups organized, and they looked at the sponsors, and they were able to cut the sponsors of that radio station, and guess what? The radio station, they dropped that because they saw that they were losing their sponsor and ad time. So we have to be savvy and not just use, you know, our strength alone in numbers is not going to mean anything. We have to project that strength politically, and we have to project it economically. And that means that everyone can play a role in that at the local level and at the national level.
On Know Your Rights, I mean, that's not something that Congress can organize, but I do know that in various, for example, my own county, there have been meetings with advocacy groups, the district attorney is very interested, and the police department in making sure that federal agents aren't violating the law. Yeah. That's something that individuals need to organize in their local
well, and I should say that, you know, at NCLR, we're proud to represent a network of about 300 community-based organizations. And I know the Hispanic Committee on Virginia has been helpful in trying to organize a place where people can go to and get some information. And I know there's other emerging groups, Casa de Maryland in Maryland. There are community-based organizations, many of which are our affiliates, which we're proud of, are trying to get information into the hands of those. But you've got to make a little bit of an effort to go to those sites and get that information. So we're trying to direct people in our website to that kind of help. But we have community-based organizations all over the country. And folks do have to look to see where they can get that help and that access. But usually, there is a community-based organization that can be helpful in directing you to information.
Just, the other thing, to have some confidence that the media environment is changing so rapidly that really the mainstream media, the online media, new media, and then ethnic media, I think in a very short time that we're going to be, through new media and ethnic media as well as at least print media, in a stronger position to be able to educate the public to how to, what immigrants bring positively and how to reform our system so that it respects those contributions.
Well, guys, I'd love to continue this conversation for the entire week. Unfortunately, we're going to get kicked out of here in a few minutes. So I wanted to thank once again all our panelists for giving their time and their expertise on their issue. I wanted to thank all of you for being here. And then once again, although we are ending the conversation today, This isn't a conversation that's over for us as an organization. So if you want more information, log on to our website at ndn.org, at immigration08.com, or at wecanstopthehate.org. So please feel free to continue the conversation, and thank you so much for coming.